I can assure you that you can do this. There is absolutely no reason that you cannot make a career transition right now. It is super easy to be discouraged. Uh, this has been obviously the most difficult year of our lives for most of us, uh, and it has changed us in many ways. And I think, in some ways, given us perspective on what's important to us, on what we want out of our career, on what we're willing to put up with in our job on a day-to-day basis. And so it's no surprise that you've chosen to join for an hour because you may be thinking about making a change. You may also find yourself on the beach, and I'll tell you specifically that the market is surprisingly strong. And I'll give you some very specific ideas this evening as to where you may want to direct your efforts. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on me because Diana went through it. I just wanted to share briefly my perspective, which is that I work with a lot of venture capital and private equity backed companies. These are growth stage companies. And man, they are hiring. So I'm not saying that's the only place to direct your efforts, but that is one example of a category of folks that are hiring. And so what we're going to do over the next hour is to go through step by step a methodology of how to find what it is you're looking for. I'm going to talk about where some of the opportunities are, specific industries. I'm going to name them. And I'm also going to talk about some of the big mistakes that I see people make continually, especially during this very unique time. And I'll just touch on LinkedIn profiles as well towards the end. So we've got a lot to cover. I have sat in your shoes, even though I'm a headhunter today and a Kellogg alum as well, although from many, many years ago. My first job search coming out of Kellogg was super challenging. The market wasn't especially strong. I wanted to pursue a technology company. And back then, if you can imagine this, back in 95, there were no tech companies that came to campus. And so I was the guy that did the off-campus job search. But what I learned along the way was that if you developed a target list and built a marketing funnel and worked to close these opportunities, that you could be very successful, much like a sales process. And even if you don't think of yourself as a salesperson, maybe you think of yourself as an engineer, same thing. It's a process. And tonight I'm going to walk you through the process. And I was lucky enough to get 7 offers, wound up at Intuit where I worked on QuickBooks. But the point is that it can be done even when you're on your own. Now, it's super easy to be discouraged by the headlines right now. Let's take a macro look just for a moment. If you can imagine, as Diana was talking about 12 months ago, we were looking at the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years. We were at 3.5% here in the US. And since that time, we zoomed back up, obviously, to double digits, and we're now back at about 6.5%. So we're making headway, but we're still a long way from full employment. That said, that is an overall number. And what you have to remember is that for college educated white collar professionals, much like you and the folks on this call, the actual unemployment rate is far lower. In fact, it is close to full employment. And all you have to do is look at Career Builder or Indeed or ZipRecruiter or any one of the 90,000 headhunters in the US, and you'll see millions of job openings. So while it is an inefficient market, there are millions of people looking for a job and there are millions of jobs looking for a person. They can't always find each other, but if you focus on the headlines, it's just really easy to get down. And so it's important to understand that there is always opportunity, especially right now. This is a great time of change. Change historically always presents opportunity. I'm going to talk about some sectors, but even within your sector, the change, if you think about it, if you uncover it, will lead you to opportunity. And we'll go through some examples. I call this value migration or job dislocation. We are seeing huge movement of people and of jobs and of dollar value. An obvious example would be from retail to e-commerce that has accelerated over the past year, or from traditional healthcare and your doctor visits to telemedicine over the past year. I suspect these are not just going to go back to the way they were. And so that's going to create a ton of opportunity. Now, value is going to migrate from one sector to another. Jobs will disappear over here and they'll reappear over here. So, yes, there is change, but that change creates opportunity if you're willing to invest the time to understand where the job is going. I also want to touch on this concept of what I call the great reshuffling. I think you're going to be hearing a lot more about this over the next 3 months. And I say that because many of my clients are starting to have this discussion. And what I mean is that companies are making a decision for themselves as to what their new officing or real estate strategy is going to be. Some companies like Twitter and Facebook and others have already decided and announced to their workforce that they are basically going to blow up the office requirement. You can now work wherever you want for as long as you want for the rest of your career with the company. That's kind of one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum, I certainly have clients who are excited about getting back to the office. And as soon as it's safe and as soon as the employees have been vaccinated, the hope is to return to the office. And then there's a lot of companies in between that are trying to decide, okay, are we going to develop a hoteling strategy where every Monday and Thursday are in the office and the other days you work where you want? The point is that I suspect you're going to see a great reshuffling here because as companies decide they're going to blow it up and go remote or virtual, there are employees that don't want that, right? That they like working in an office. Maybe they're extroverts, or maybe that's where they do their best work. Some people just can't work at home, as I think we found out over the past year. On the other hand, there are companies that are requiring people to go back to the office. I spoke to one today, and she said, "You know what? I'm done. I'm not doing an hour commute every day, losing 2 hours of my life. I don't do my best work in the office anyway." And so she's already decided to start looking. And so the point is, you're going to see a great reshuffling that's going to create a lot of job opportunities and job openings over the next few months. This is going to happen very quickly. So the point is to keep calm. The point is to not believe the headlines and have a plan. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong is they just don't have a plan. So let me touch on some of the big mistakes that I see people make as they take this process on. The first, of course, which is the obvious one, is to panic, right? That's not going to get us anywhere. And so we're going to put that on a shelf. Also, having no plan. At Kellogg, we learned, it was drilled into us, the importance of planning, whether it's marketing or sales or finance or inventory or technology. This is no different. The difference is you have to do it for yourself, but you need to have a plan. Even a pretty crappy plan, you'll get far better results than what most job seekers do, which is to just kind of approach it in a random, haphazard way. Another big mistake that I see people make often, especially over the past 12 months during this COVID era, is leaving one company and joining a competitor to that company. And frequently, the exact issues that they were trying to move away from are the same issues in this company. Because, as you know, just like stocks move together in a basket if they're in the same industry, you have largely the same business issues from company to company in an industry. And so typically you might want to think about looking outside your industry, which may feel a little uncomfortable, but you may often find that's your best move. And I see a lot of candidates forget to do that. Another mistake, taking a role without conducting due diligence. I'm continually surprised how even sophisticated, well-educated people don't invest the time to do their own due diligence on the company, on the cash in the bank and the burn rate and some of the business issues. And that can lead to mistakes that are kind of unforced errors. Really, you have no one to blame but yourself. Holding out for the perfect situation. This over the past 12 months has been a common one. My advice has been over the past 12 months, and you've probably heard me say this or write about it, is to take the first acceptable job you can find. Because if you don't, you may be waiting 3 months, 6 months, 12 months for that next one to come along. Now that the job market's improving pretty quickly, my advice still remains the same. It's just to raise your bar, right? Bring your bar up in terms of what you're willing to accept. And I'll give you some examples shortly. Spending a lot of time on your resume, not a great use of time, right? That's not going to get you the job. That's not going to get you meetings. So, look, there are a lot of mistakes. We're going to talk tonight over the next 45 minutes about an action plan that you can put into place, whether you're actively looking, whether you're thinking about looking, and even if you're not looking at all, and maybe you've just taken a job and you're still joining us tonight. I always say dig your well before you're thirsty. And so I'm going to touch on that as well. Now, remember, you don't have to be perfect at this. You don't have to outrun the bear. You just have to outrun the guy in front of you. And I say that half jokingly because there is no perfect in job searching. There's no perfect job. There's going to be trade-offs any way you look at it. The key is to have a plan, and the key is to know yourself well enough to know what you want and then how you're going to find it. And that's what we're going to go through. Now, you can't start that process without knowing two key pieces of data. And this is different for everybody, for each of us. The first is the importance or the urgency of making a move at all. Now, if your company is an unprofitable startup and has 3 months left of cash in the bank before it files for bankruptcy, and we've seen a lot of bankruptcies the past 12 months, then you need to get moving now. You're already late if you've got 3 months left on that burn rate. You also need to understand your household's burn rate and your risk tolerance, which will guide you in how selective you can afford to be. And I think this year, the savings rate in the U.S. is at a maybe not a record high, but it's dramatically higher than it was. We're making money and we have nothing to spend it on. So our burn rate has come down collectively as households. I guarantee that's going to start to go up over the next few months as things reopen. But the key is to, as you head into a job search, to understand your past and your future and how urgent it is to make a move and how selective you can afford to be. If you've got a lot of cash reserves, maybe you're a second income in your household, then you can afford to be a bit more selective. Your bar can be a bit higher. But for many people, that's not the case, right? Half of this country doesn't have a month's worth of cash in the bank. You can't afford to be quite as selective. Okay, so let's talk about finding your next role. Let's talk about where to target and where to focus your energy. And the very simple tool that I use with individuals, with candidates, as I kind of talk about this, has 3 circles. And we're looking for the bullseye in the middle. The first question is, what are you in the top 5% at? Now, I call a rock star someone that is in the top 5% of the market or of the talent available. And I'm an optimist, and I think all of us have the ability to be a rock star at something. The problem is many of us never find out what that is. We don't discover. Maybe we weren't encouraged enough as a child, but the time is never too late to find your top 5% skill. You will earn meaningfully more money, have way more fun, and be in far more demand once you discover your top 5%. If you're fuzzy on what it is, and it's not a laundry list of 8 things, right? It's 1 or 2 things. Ask people that know you. Ask people that have worked with you. Ask your spouse. Ask your professors. They will give you keen insights as to what you're better than 95% of the market at. And so that's the first circle. The second is, what do you love, right? It's very hard to stay engaged and do great work if you're not doing something you love. For some people, that's developing a brand. For some people, that's writing. For some people, that's coding. It's super important to know what you love. And the third is, what is a way that you can create value, right? So I may love, something like a hobby, like watching Netflix, but no one's going to pay me to do it, right? So clearly we have to find the intersection of these 3, but these are the 3 questions that you should be asking yourself regularly, maybe even quarterly. What are you best at? What do you love doing? And what are people going to pay you for? How do you create value? And if you need a hint on that last one, there's 2 big ways. There's a lot of ways, but there's 2 big ones. One is driving the top line. How are you going to increase sales and revenue at your business? And the second is, how are you going to reduce expenses at your business, operational efficiency and the like, right? Those are the 2 kind of key drivers to think about. Sounds pretty obvious, but most categories fall into those. I find that for many people, if you can find your target in that Venn diagram, in three categories, you're going to have the most success. And I'll slow down and kind of go through them. The first is what I call makers. The second is shakers, and finally takers. Makers are people who create the product at a company. They deliver the service, right? These are product managers. These are software developers. These are Amazon delivery guys, right? These are people that without whom there would be no product or service. The second category are shakers, right? So they sell it, whatever it is. It might be salespeople, but there's a whole bunch of other roles that are tied to that. So what if you're a great demand gen marketer or head of growth marketing who fills the funnel for the sales reps? You are very much a shaker, and there's other roles in there as well. And then takers, right? People that collect the cash, that ring the bell, that keep the money coming in and driving oxygen, which is the fuel of any business. So the point of this is to say that even in a tight job market, such as the one we're in, the closer you can align yourself to maker, shaker, or taker, the more success you're probably going to have. This is not a time when companies are hiring generalists. This is not a time when companies are hiring luxury hires or extra hires, optional hires. It's not happening. What is happening are if we can't make the product and deliver it, and we can't sell it, and we can't make money, then there's no company. So they haven't stopped on those three. So once you figure out your bullseye, now you're ready to kind of start your plan. And this is a little bit of go slow to go fast. It's some self-reflection. I encourage you to do it over wine because that's where you'll really start to get the juices flowing. Once you've done that exercise, then the next step, again, knowing yourself and being honest with yourself, is to understand what I call your MVP, your minimum viable position. What job are you willing to take? Now, that sounds really bad because who wants to take a job that you're willing to take? What I mean is that we all have a bar, and that bar goes up and down at different points in our life. And it ties back to what we discussed on your company's burn rate and your personal financial burn rate. And that's going to adjust your bar as well. But it's super important to know where your bar is and write it down and have your criteria and have your priorities. Because when the right job comes along, you want to be able to quickly identify it and say, I'm going to take this job if I get the offer. Remember that if you pass, you may be waiting 3 months, 6 months, 12 months to find the next one. So you want to think about that ahead of time. You don't want to be thinking about that the night before the offer expires. I would encourage you to think about things like this: a stable company, meaning cash in the bank, and in a sector that is stable or growing. So when we did this webinar last year and Diana hosted it, at the time, I strongly encouraged people to steer away from hospitality. Now, if you just look at where we are in the cycle, hospitality over the next 6 months looks like it's going to be growing pretty quickly. And that doesn't mean you work at a hotel company necessarily, but there's a whole ecosystem around travel, around hospitality, around dining, et cetera. So that now creates opportunity. Again, it means kind of staying open to and aware as to where sectors are in their cycle, very much like you do when you invest. Thinking about the balance sheet and the cash runway of the business and not being afraid to ask as you do due diligence on a company, especially a private company, so that you know what you're dealing with, right? It's important to be realistic. No job is perfect. It might be the right job, but the wrong title, or it might be the right company, but it's the wrong level, or it may be the cash isn't quite what you want, but the equity is very good. There's all trade-offs. There's no right or wrong. But again, knowing these things ahead of time so that you can set that bar and then take the first thing that clears that bar is what I recommend. It's the same advice I give to my clients when they're hiring, right? We develop a scorecard, and this is kind of in the book that I've written, and we set the bar, and then we hire the first person that clears that bar. Now we keep the bar super high, right? But we're not going to risk losing someone or passing and then waiting 6 months. Now I'll give you some other good news, which is as you're having this self-reflection on your bar and your MVP, you have the greatest hall pass of all time. I've been recruiting now for 25, 27 years. And I've never seen as many resumes or LinkedIn profiles that I would describe as choppy as there are now. So many people have been displaced, sadly, laid off, downsized, right sized, outsourced, offshored, had to take multiple jobs. And so you have air cover no matter what your situation is, no matter how bad you think the past 12 months has been to you, and I know it has. You have this great hall pass. You have air cover. Employers, my clients who are employers, are more open than they have ever been to an imperfect resume or to a LinkedIn profile that's not quite tight or to someone that's been on the beach for 3 months. And so use that to your advantage, but don't wait. The worst thing you can do is be the last one back into the pool, right? You want to get a jump start on this. And I think now's the time to do that. So as we start to think about the industries of where you want to focus your time, so we figured out what you want to do, and then we figured out kind of how urgent the need is and how quickly you want to find something. Now the next question is, well, where do you want to look? What industry? And it comes right back to psychology. It comes right back to Maslow's needs, right? Because if you think about the past 12 months, many jobs, many companies, many services disappeared at the top of this pyramid, but we still needed air and water and food and shelter and sleep. We still needed security and health and property, right? And love and belonging, certainly, to get through the past year. And so if you're conservative, you want to stay towards the bottom of the triangle, the bottom of the pyramid, and focus on sectors that are largely not going to go away. They may not be exploding, but they're not going to go away. Whereas other more sexy or optional sectors can come and go, right? Based on financial cycles, as we've seen over the past 12 months. So let me give you now some sectors that I see booming right now. And again, this is being recorded, so you don't have to scramble to write it all down. But we'll go through some of these, and I'm just going to randomly kind of pick some. Legal is booming. There's a lot of lawsuits right now for a whole lot of reasons. And so that creates a lot of opportunity, unfortunately, in not just the law firms, but the surrounding sectors. And there's a lot of changes happening in the law industry. Same with the medical industry. Telemedicine has 10x'd over the past year. That's not about to change. Social networks, surprisingly, are still doing very, very well, as is the mortgage business, as people move from cities to suburbs, as they move from California to Austin. All these very meaningful changes that you read about, again, create business opportunities, which then create employment opportunities. E-learning, right? I've got 2 kids in school. Many of you do as well. And it's not like e-learning is going to go away anytime soon, right? It's been turbocharged by 10 years, and that's not about to change. The cannabis industry, we could do a whole webinar on that, but I've got a number of clients in and around that sector, and it's booming. So, I'm not going to go through all of these, but the point is that anyone that tells you that there's not opportunity right now isn't looking very hard. And that's not to mention recreation, travel, hospitality. They are about to explode. You have a coiled spring, this pent up demand of, 300 million Americans who have been trapped at home for a year and are eager to get out and spend money, and that creates opportunity. So I encourage you to be creative, and I encourage you to not believe the headlines, and really think about the sectors that you want to place your bets on, right? Where do you want to focus? Where do you want to do that is the next question, geographically, right? So we've got our skill, we know what we want to do. Now we've picked our industry or industries, maybe where we work or maybe not. Now we got to talk about where do we want to do it. And what I have observed recently is that it's still pretty difficult to secure a job at a distance, long distance, unless that company's plan is to remain 100% virtual or remote even after the vaccine takes hold. So what I'm saying is that if you are in Chicago, it is my recommendation to focus a disproportionate amount of your efforts either on Chicago area companies or companies throughout the US or the world that are planning to stay virtual. A lot of companies are nervous right now about hiring people remotely if they're planning to go back to the office because they feel like they're going to have some folks, stragglers, kind of hanging out there. And then what are they going to have to do? And you're at risk of being separated and it being a pretty short journey. So I'd encourage you to double down on these two areas, at least for now. Probably not going to be the last job of your life, but you're likely to have more success locally and 100% virtual. And for some people, that's not an option. They don't want to work virtually, in which case I would double down in your market. Okay, so now we know where we're going to focus geographically. Let's talk about how do we actually find it. That's the tricky part, isn't it? And I see most people get this entirely backwards. Each day I get, countless emails. Who do you know? Or I'm looking for a job. Uh, can you forward this to someone? And it's just very haphazard and random. We're taking our role and then we try to throw it out there into the world to see what happens. Not a great way to go about it. What does work and works almost every time is to take your existing network and activate your network to identify your next role. I call this purposeful networking, not bullshit random networking. I'm not talking about going to cocktail parties on Thursday nights back when we could go to cocktail parties. That's not statistically how you're going to find it. But this is how it is done. If your strategy is to sit home and wait for a headhunter to call with your next job, your odds are you're going to fail. Headhunters collectively place about 4% of the job moves out there. If your strategy is to click on apply on job boards all day, which there's actually software that'll do it for you, by the way. You don't even have to burn the calorie anymore to press the button. You're going to fail because job boards collectively result in less than 10% of the movements. 80+% of professional level jobs are found through personal introductions. That is just how it's done. Now, some of that is employee referrals, some of that is activating your network, but that's how you're going to find this next job. If I was a betting man and you said, how am I going to find it? I would bet you're going to find it. Even if you consider yourself to be a lousy networker and you use the strategy that I'm about to go through, I suspect you'll be successful. So let's go to it. So everyone has a network. Hopefully you are digging your well before you're thirsty. But even if you're not a great networker and you say, "Oh, I'm really bad at staying in touch with people," I'm shocked when people really stop and think about all the people that they know, all the people in your life that, if you made it easy for them, would help you in some way. And that takes some soul searching. It also takes a bit of humility, uh, where you think about all the managers that you've had over the years and you write them down, all your mentors. So maybe they were a senior level manager, maybe your boss's boss, who took a liking to you for whatever reason, or you did a great job on a project, and you write them down as well. All your peers, right? So you were head of marketing and you had a head of sales next to you, a head of finance next to you, a head of ops next to you. You write them down as well. Your investors and your board members. Hopefully the company did well. Maybe if it was a private company, and you write them down. All the customers, think about all the customers that you interacted with, even if they weren't necessarily your customers, right? If you worked in sales, but even if you worked in marketing, you got to know a lot of customers, you write them down as well. Vendors, so thinking on the back end of your company, all the businesses that do business with you that kind of owe you one, right? Because you've paid them along the way as your vendor. So we're already making this list, and I can assure you that it's far longer than you think. On top of that, we add people from Kellogg, right? So our professors, our classmates, our mentors, spouses of our friends and classmates, our first degree connections in LinkedIn, right? So what I often find when I go through this exercise with people is I say, I want you to work on this and send me the list. And they think it's going to be I'll ask them and they're like, oh, it's probably gonna be 30, 40 people. They send me a list of 500 to 1,000 people. Some people are in the thousands. And so now the issue is your network is too big, right? You've actually got too big a network. And so now the question is, well, how do you prioritize all that? Because we came up with a ton of people that we want to activate. We don't want to ask them to do anything yet, but we'll get to that. But we got to prioritize that. And so to do that, I kind of set it up in Excel or Google Docs and Google Sheets, and kind of ask yourself 3 questions for each person. This takes an hour, this exercise. Does the person know you really well, or just kind of know you, right? Or would they just kind of recognize your name? And that's kind of 3, 2, 1 on the first column. Do they think really highly of me? Again, 3, 2, 1. So maybe I crushed a project and I tripled revenue, and the CEO, thought I was just the king. That's a 3. Someone who thought I was a good writer, maybe that was a 1, right? But we add that to that column. And then, is the person in a position to hire me or introduce me to people who could hire me? So that's often level related, right? It might be a headhunter, it might be a private equity investor, it could be a CEO versus, say a software developer or an office manager who's maybe not in a position to hire me or refer me. And so that's 3, 2, 1 as well. You add it up or you multiply it, develop your own great methodology, and you're now going to take this list, which is 500 to 5,000 people, and we've prioritized it. Now we have something that's actually actionable, right? We can actually do something with this. And again, the odds are you're going to find your next role from this list. We don't know who it is, we don't know how, and it may be luck. I heard about one this morning where I introduced someone for a job opportunity. They wound up hiring the brother of this individual. I didn't even know this, but again, it was through a network. Okay, so how do we activate this? What most people do, which is entirely backwards, is they send mass outreach, mass mail, mass emails, mass texts to this whole list. And they'll send their resume as an attachment with a far too long cover letter. And they'll say, who do you know? Or are you hiring? And they're pushing the work onto this person, which also by the way, puts the pressure on this person. And that strategy rarely works, because while I said people will do stuff for you, they'll help you, they're busy, especially right now. And they'll do it if you make it super easy for them. Don't delegate this to your network. Leverage or activate your network. So the way to do that is to create a list. And this list includes 30 companies. I call this your Focus 30 list. There's no magic in the number 30, but what I found is 30 is enough companies to fill that pipeline that I talked about earlier. And the odds are you will wind up with some marbles coming out the bottom. If you start with 2 or 3 companies, it's just not enough. And if you start with 500 companies, you can't get enough headway. You can't build enough momentum with that many companies. So 30 just works really well. And these companies, again, should be local companies or virtual. We talked about that. And they should be in sectors that are either stable or growing, right? So a sector that's probably not would be traditional automobiles, right? I don't see a lot of growth there over the next 10 years. EV, electric vehicles, absolutely. Traditional SUVs, probably not so much, right? So be strategic about where you want to invest your time. Pick those 30 like you're picking a portfolio of 30 stocks. Now, how do you pick those 30 companies? These are companies where you have an unfair advantage. Maybe you know that business inside and out. Maybe you have some in-depth information about their business. This happens a lot when someone moves from a company to one of their customers or one of their vendors, right? You've seen it from the other side. You're incredibly valuable because you have this in-depth understanding. Maybe you have a group of former coworkers, right, that left one company and eventually 7 of them wound up at another company. That would be another example of a company that might be on your focus list. So I would think about customers, I would think about vendors, partners, versus starting with random companies. But the point is, you're developing this target list of 30 companies. And by the way, this is a rolling list. So when one company gives you a dead end and says, we don't want you here. We've got nothing. We're not hiring. Forget about it. You replace them on the list with another company. Okay. So it's a rolling list. Now, the step that most people don't do, and I would encourage you to do it, is to research these 30 companies like your life depends on it. Invest the time to understand these businesses inside and out. There's no excuse anymore, thanks to the internet, to understand these businesses, even if they're private, thoroughly. Uh, I mean, the business when you go into the meeting, the interview, and you tell the interviewer things that they didn't even know about their company. That's researching a company. Now, once you've got your list of companies, we then have to say, okay, are they hiring? And so, one way to do that, of course, is the job section or career section of that company's website. But another is to set up daily email job alerts. So you go to alerts.google.com and you list those 30 companies. And now you're getting daily alerts, not just on job opportunities, but on news and headlines, investment ideas, et cetera, related to your Focus 30 list. We're also tracking, and all this is tracked in Google Sheets or Excel. We're also tracking job openings. And you're setting up daily job alerts from Indeed, from ZipRecruiter, from LinkedIn. All the big guys have them. And it'll email you every time a new job becomes available at a target company. It's totally free. And it's going to email this to you every day. It's great. You wake up and you got jobs in your email box. Here's the mistake. Whatever you do, don't click apply. Do not apply online. Don't click that button that says apply here. Use these job alerts as information, as leads. You're a sales rep. They are leads for you. But the last thing you want to do is click apply. Why is that? You are going to wind up in a stack of this many applications that are typically screened by some computer first, and then screened by some very, very junior HR person or administrative person who knows nothing about the job or the role or you or anything. Instead, use your research, because you've been doing all that research, to identify the hiring manager. It's not that hard, not HR, but the person who's actually making the decision. If it's a marketing role, at least go to the VP of marketing. If it's a sales role, the VP of sales, et cetera. Track down their email address. There are infinite tools online. These are 4 of them to track down people's email address, and ask them, ask these search engines the name, and it'll give you their email address. It's great. Okay. So now we have our target list. You're going to conduct a marketing campaign to these folks, and it is based on research. It is based on them, not you. Think like a marketer. They are your customer. What does your customer need solved? And what is the problem that you can solve? Back to the 3 circles that we talked about. A campaign is best done on email still. I have seen some people prior to COVID having success with physical mail or FedEx, but that's not working anymore because so many people working at home. So we're back to email. When you identify that VP of marketing or that VP of sales or that CEO or that private equity investor, you're going to email them 4 times. Now, I know that sounds like a lot, but you'll be shocked. And I've done these tests, found that 25% of the time, the response comes on that 4th send. So it's just like a sales rep. If you make only 1 attempt, they have found that in sales, you need to make 9 attempts to land a deal. Same thing here, right? At least 4 emails. Space them out, right? Well, maybe every other day or every 3rd day. Again, you're tracking like a CRM, every person that you're reaching out to. I love sending evenings and weekends. Evenings and weekends, their inbox is not filling up during the day. And so you're much higher likelihood of getting a response. Now, what do you write, right? That's really the mystery, isn't it? What you don't do, let's start with that, right? What you don't do, which is what most people do, is have a cover letter, a 5-paragraph, super dense cover letter, just like we learned in school, with your resume attached. I can tell you that will wind up in, if not in the spam box because it has an attachment, and most companies are screening it for attachments from strange email addresses, it's not going to get read. right? You're maybe going to get 5 seconds, and 5 seconds, I can't read that. What they can read is a super short teaser of a message that's focused on their number one problem. Well, how do I know their number one problem? You know it because you've done all that research, right? We talked about that. And that was the whole point of doing the research, methodical research about the industry, the company, their problems, their competitors, what's happening with their stock if they're public. And if you don't know what their problem is, in your email, you can ask them, what's your biggest problem? And then you come back with the solution. The reason this works is there's a bit of a shock factor. It is so different than most other job seekers who do it the old fashioned way, right? Long cover letter, copy and paste, attach their resume. It doesn't work. No one cares about your aspirations, dreams, or goals, right? Save that for your roommate or your spouse or your partner. This is an opportunity to solve someone's problem. If they're the head of marketing, maybe they need more leads. If they're the head of sales, maybe they're always missing the number. If it's the CTO, maybe she's got a security issue. Whatever it is, you know from your research, and you craft a 5 sentence email, 5 sentences. It is super short. There's a famous author who I can't remember right now who said, you edit and you edit and you edit and revise and revise until you can't simplify it anymore. That's when you know you've got it. And that's what you should do. This is not copy and paste. 30 people get 30 different emails. Now you start to see why this takes time, but this is how it's done. This is what actually works. Now, in this campaign, your email campaign, your subject line is the number one thing. If it doesn't get opened, they're not going to read it. So it has to get attention. I actually track all my subject lines, and I track their software that I track open rates. If you're into that, you can do it, but you'll know from your response rates which subject lines are working. So don't blast all 30, start with 5 and see which response rates work and start to iterate. The last thing you want to write in the subject line is anything that smells like looking for a job or um, Kellogg alumni. Like, no one cares. But if it's my number one problem and there's a tease that tells me you may have the answer, I'm going to open that email. The call to action is equally important in email or any communication. And I find that the action that works, the call to action, to be a 15-minute Zoom video call. The reason it works really well is just like this. 90% of communication is visual. So it's far better than a phone call. It's far better than an email exchange. And over the past year, people have gotten pretty used to it. So it's a lot less intrusive, perhaps, than it used to be. So that is the ask, right? I have an idea for your business. I think I can solve one of your biggest problems. I'd love to hop on a Zoom video call for 15 minutes to share the research that I've uncovered. If this is a consumer packaged goods company, you've gone to the grocery store, you've bought every food in the aisle, you've done a taste test, you've dissected it, you've studied the nutrition, and you've cracked the code on why their market share is slipping. And you write that email to say, I'd like to get on a call because I think I figured out why your 16-ounce size of this cereal ain't working. That head of marketing is going to be pretty interested. But if you start with, I'm looking for a job, they won't be. Now, once you're on the Zoom video call, of course, now you're going to engage in a great conversation that's going to lead to the job. And the reason that works is once you get the yes, you're going to prepare for that meeting like your life depends on it. I'm talking about 5 or 10 hours, which I know sounds insane, but I can tell you from the 30,000 people that I've interviewed, candidates, that 99% are so ill prepared for the conversation that you will distinguish yourself. You'll actually convince a hiring manager to create a role for you if you can demonstrate that you're that kind of person that understands the issues, that can frame business problems, and that can solve it for them. But you have to do that work. You have to do that legwork. There's just no way around it. The spam or copy and paste is not going to work. Okay, we got about 10 minutes left. We're definitely going to finish on time. I want to touch on that Zoom session, that video interview, because this year we've all come a long way, maybe too far in Zoom, but I still see candidates that are struggling with it sometimes, and I know it can be awkward. There are some obvious things, right? Logging in early, making sure everything's working, reboot your computer before you start. I'm not going to bore you with those things. But what I will say is that eye contact and engagement are crucial. So what I typically recommend is to have your notes or your questions or your thoughts kind of positioned in a window right next to the camera on your screen, just below it. Like right now, I have my presentation right below the camera, so I can look at the camera. I can have eye contact. That is what engages people. But every day, I talk to a candidate for a role, and their camera's positioned, and they talk to me like this because their camera is down here. They should be looking up here, right? You shouldn't just be looking at yourself. No one needs to do that. You want to be looking at your audience, which I know is hard because it's that tiny little glass lens, but that makes all the difference. Also, energy. So, hand motions and energy that's emphatic, not going crazy, but you cannot make that kind of impression and impact if you're kind of, talking like this and there's no movement and it's all monotone, and you'll put that person to sleep before the 15 minutes is over. It's just really boring. They'll be gone if they even stay awake, or they'll be checking their email, which is even worse. But if you're like using their name and you're like, Paula, I've tried all these foods. I understand what's the problem, and she'll be wrapped in attention. Okay, so if you're not confident, even after a year of Zoom calls, and I understand that, do a mock interview with someone you trust, right? Someone that can record it and you'll look at yourself. And I know it's hard to do that, but video interviewing is a very, very different skill than in-person interviewing. And I don't think video interviewing is going to go away anytime soon. So you might as well get used to it. After you've had that meeting, remember that we never sent our resume, did we? We just sent a link to our LinkedIn profile and included that in the 5-sentence email. And that's what got the meeting. After the meeting, we want to follow up with something. What do you follow up with? That is the time to follow up with a more comprehensive resume or maybe even a bio. The great news is you can take your learnings from the call and you can create what I call a mirror resume. A mirror resume is just a document that mirrors that hiring manager's biggest challenge. A lot of times that's written in a job description, but let's say there was no job description. Let's say you found this on your own and you got the VP of marketing to take a call, but you identified that she's got 3 big problems in her business and you talked about them for 15 minutes. Now you take your resume and you spend time customizing it. No one says you can't do this, right? We all had one version at Kellogg, but you can have infinite versions. And you customize it to match that particular company and role. You delete stuff that's not relevant. You add stuff that is. You bring stuff to the top that's especially relevant. You make sure your headline nails exactly their biggest problem. So when you send that and you're able to explain how you'll create value, uh, the reader will say, oh my God, this person was dropped on my lap and was created for this role. It's all optics, but it works because you're going to have done the legwork and the research. You had a great conversation. You follow up with this document that somehow was perfectly suited for the job. You're kind of halfway home. Again, you can't do this for 100 companies. There's just not enough time in the day, especially if you've got a full-time job. So again, your Focus 30 list is the way to go. We're almost done, and then we'll open it up for questions. There's a couple of documents you want to also have ready at your disposal as you engage into this search. One I talk a lot about, which is your SARs. That sounds like SARS, so I guess I need to change that. But it stands for situation, action, and result. So in every job you've ever had, in every role you've ever had, at every company, you had a situation that you stepped into, right? You inherited something in the business. Then you took a series of actions, and then there were results. And these are hard to remember. And so you want to refresh yourself. I actually keep a list of all mine, right? In a spreadsheet. What did I step into? Was it a turnaround? Was it a startup? Was it a new product launch? What specific things did I do? And I don't mean a laundry list, but what were the big 2 or 3 action steps that we identified and took action? And then what were the results, right? We took share, we grew revenue 30%, We quantify those. These are super important for your resume, for your LinkedIn, and for your discussion with people. And then your references, obviously. Having those put together ahead of time can make the difference. When a candidate struggles to come up with references, a lot of my clients get really nervous because they worry that this person is not referenceable. And so my recommendation is have that ready before you go. Remember, your resume is going to look like this if you click apply. So avoid all that, go through this process. Now, the LinkedIn profile is equally important. So let me just touch on that for a moment before we go to Q&A. Your LinkedIn profile, you only get one, right? You can't customize it. Now, you can change it over time, but everyone's going to see the same one. Your LinkedIn profile is a job, it's an advertisement for you. It's not your life story, it's not your resume. It is an advertisement for you. And you get 6 seconds. The studies show that on average, you get 6 seconds. So how do you use every piece of those 6 seconds to your advantage? It is not about job descriptions, right? If you're a product manager, if you're a CFO, if you're a sales rep, the reader knows what that is, right? They know what it is. Don't say hired to do this, that, and the other. Talk about your quantifiable achievements, how you took market share, increased revenue, hired 17 people, increased retention, whatever it was. How did you create value? Also, maximize those 2 photos. I say 2 because there's the small face shot photo, right? But then there's your big banner photo, and you should be maximizing both of those. And then finally, when in doubt, leave it out. So most people try to cram 10 pounds of crap into a 5-pound bag, and you wind up with a mishmash. And again, you only get 6 seconds. So if it's not going to make the difference for you, if no one's going to hire you or take a meeting for that, leave it out. Just get rid of it because it's not going to make the difference. That will let everything else come to the surface. I do want to mention real quick before we open it up, I've got a LinkedIn makeover service. I'm not going to spend much time on it now, but if you're interested, I work with people one-on-one, and we're going to nail your profile and really tell the story in 6 seconds. So you can learn about that on the website. Just go to recruitrockstars.com/LinkedIn. So with that, I'm happy to open it up.